Afternoon, Lions fans. We're talking about defensive coordinator changes to the Detroit Lions in 2024. There's been a lot of talk this season about AG needs to be fired or that AG is not a good defensive coordinator. And let's play along for a minute. So I've done a little research about one individual, and he's about to lose his head coaching position, and his name is Ron Rivera. If he actually does lose his position with the Washington Commanders, I think that Ron Rivera could be a perfect fit for Detroit as the defensive coordinator. Now, it's not to say that Calvin Shepard wouldn't get an opportunity to interview for the position, but man, Ron Rivera's track record, pretty good. And I think when you're talking about, old coaches, going back down to coordinator ranks, I think that this one fits. And this is going to be a quick video, but this is what I wanted to share with you. Before Ron Rivera took over as the head coach of the Carolina Panthers, he had 2 stints as a defensive coordinator. He was a former NFL linebacker, and he was the defensive coordinator for the Chicago Bears for 3 seasons from 2004 to 2006, and then the San Diego Chargers for 3.5 seasons from 2007 to 2010. Of course, in his fourth and perhaps his final season with the Washington Commanders, he assumed the role of interim defensive coordinator over the last 5 games this season. And after firing their defensive coordinator, Jack Del Rio, which was roughly November 20th or so, this team, or his first test at least, as being the defensive play caller, would become a difficult one. The Commanders had a few extra days off, and they played on that Thursday. But man, they went up against the high-octane Miami Dolphins, which was not an easy test for anybody, but especially the Commanders, who just happened to switch their defensive coordinator out to their head coach. So what I wanted to share with you, though, is when Ron Rivera was a defensive coordinator, let's go back and look how successful he actually was. 2004 with the Bears. Defense ranked 12th in total defense and 13th in scoring defense. 2005, they were number 2 in total defense, number 1 in scoring defense. 2006, they were 5th overall as total defense and number 3 in scoring defense. 2007, they were number 14, ranked 14th in total defense and number 5, ranked 5th in scoring defense. Now, he was the defensive coordinator for part of that 2007 season after the Chargers fired Ted Cottrell. 2008, they ranked 25th in total defense and 15th in scoring defense. And in 2009, 16th in total defense, 11th in scoring defense. And his last season as a defensive coordinator, 2010, they were the first ranked defense in the league and 10th in scoring defense. So what do I notice from this? Number one, when he began as the defensive coordinator for both teams, they got incrementally better every season. But they also started out about, middle of the pack as far as, the defensive ranks. And then they got really good. He went from 12th to 2nd and then 2nd back down to 5th. And then he took over and they were 14th with the Chargers and they dropped down to 25th, but then they jumped up to 16th and then 1st overall. So he's had 3 defenses ranked in the top 5 out of 7 seasons that he was a defensive coordinator. So what does that tell us? It tells me that Ron Rivera is a much better defensive coordinator than he's probably a head coach. And I think that type of individual is exactly what the Lions would want to be looking for. I don't think that Ron Rivera is going to get another shot at a head coaching position right away. So joining a hot team like the Detroit Lions would probably be pretty attractive to Ron Rivera, where he does have some key pieces that he can work with. And they have a, general manager in Brad Holmes that tends to make the right picks. You bring somebody like him in and you've got a ton of experience that he's going to bring, to the team. And look, he's been coaching up, players like Montez Sweat and seeing what players like that can do. And there's a reason why these players are successful in his defensive schemes. So my initial premonition here would be that Ron Rivera would get interviewed by the Lions for a defensive coordinator position should Aaron Glenn take a head coaching position or be let go in the offseason. So be on the lookout for Ron Rivera to head to the Detroit Lions as a defensive coordinator in 2024. This is my first candidate talk about replacing Aaron Glenn. But look, Aaron Glenn, maybe it's not all him. And I had this conversation the other day where I think we need to look at the personnel a little bit deeper and give Aaron Glenn maybe his flowers a little bit for what he's had to deal with. The Lions went out in the offseason to make some moves to get better, right? They brought in Cam Sutton, Emmanuel Mosley, CJ Gardner-Johnson. Two of those players really never made the field. And that was a huge turn of events for the Detroit Lions defense. Aaron Glenn was expecting to have a top 10 safety in CJ Gardner-Johnson on the field. And Emmanuel Mosley somewhere in the top 25. And then you have Cam Sutton, who's also somewhere in the top 20 as a cornerback. So that's a huge change. And that's been our Achilles heel all season, has been the defensive backs. Until recently, where these guys have started to make plays. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not giving up big yards, big plays, explosive plays, because they have, but they're coming up with turnovers and getting them at the right time too. Now, speaking of the cornerbacks specifically, or the defensive backs specifically, whose fault is it when these guys are not in the right alignment? They're not running, the right formation or underneath the right scheme on the defense. That falls on Dre Bly. I think that everybody forgets that Dre Bly is in his first season as an NFL coach for the defensive back room. We saw the same thing kind of happening with Aubrey Pleasant, where there seemed to be a lot of miscommunications between the back and the front of the defense. Maybe Dre Bly is still trying to figure out some things, but at the same time, he doesn't have the personnel that he needs either. The Lions are missing a true number one shutdown type cornerback. And when they get one, this defense will be okay. Right now, we're not getting a push in the front of the defensive line. And when you're not getting that push and you're not getting the right type of pressure that results in negative plays for the offense, your defensive backs are only going to be able to stay sticky for so long. You can't expect these guys to last longer than 3 seconds and not give up big plays. Like we just saw versus the Cowboys. Dak Prescott was sacked in the end zone, but he squirted out because Derek Barnes missed a tackle. Whose fault is it that CeeDee Lamb caught a 92-yard touchdown? I would say that Derek Barnes missed the tackle. AG called the perfect defense. He got his guy home. Dak was definitely about to get sacked. He missed the play. Had that play not happened the way that it did, we're talking a totally different ball game. So Kendall Vildor was lined up on CeeDee Lamb, which I don't believe was probably the best call. I would have had Cam Sutton traveling all day on CeeDee Lamb. But at the same time, they were betting on the linebackers to get home. And AG called the right defense. It just didn't go their way because Barnes made a huge mistake. So I think if you look at every single play this season that there was a big play and a big explosive play, you're going to find a few things. You're going to find where the defensive front makes mistakes, which lead to the defensive backs not being able to do their job. They just can't hang long enough. Nobody can. I don't care if you're Sauce Gardner, Devon Witherspoon, Jalen Ramsey. I don't care what the cornerback is. Not one of them is going to be able to hang with a receiver for 5 seconds. And we saw where Lamar Jackson had 9.24 seconds on some plays earlier in the season. So it's a culmination of a lot of things. There's a give and a take on both sides, of the defense, front or back. They have to work together. They have to complement each other. If the defense is not able to get the right type of pressure up front, that's where I would expect AG and Dre Bly to have a conversation of, hey, how do we just keep things underneath us? Let's not let these guys get past us for the big plays. Let's keep it underneath us. So then you roll into that's a scheme issue, and that's play calling issues. And that's where AG is now just realizing that there was other ways to do it. Maybe he knew, but he's just now starting to use it and bringing in a heavier DB package. I don't know why they were scared to do it without CJ Gardner, but for whatever reason, the last 4 weeks, they've been doing it. Or at least since, I want to say, the Saints and the Broncos game, they started to do a 3-2-6 more often and a 4-2-5 more often, which is exactly where you need to be when you're trying to prevent big plays to good wide receivers. So there's a lot that we could dissect, and we will in the offseason. We'll look at a lot of different scenarios. But for right now, if Aaron Glenn is not retained by the Detroit Lions, or if he moves on to a head coaching position, I think it's time to start the conversation on, well, what head coaches are about to become available. Ron Rivera more than likely will become available in the next week or two. And I think he's an opportunity for the Lions. It's just maybe too early in the season for the Lions to make a decision, unless they just want to bring him in as some sort of an assistant, or some sort of a consultant, if you will, that has an opportunity to move up to defensive coordinator if that position opens up. I don't know. There's ways that they can do it without shaking the tree too much, but we'll see what happens. The other big thing is we try to promote the truth, the honesty, and the transparency about everything that we do and everything that we talk about. So that's it for today's episode of Defensive Coordinator Options for 2024. And we'll be on the lookout to see if there's any movement with Ron Rivera over the coming weeks and see how that plays into the Lions' hands. So here's to the playoffs, and F the Cowboys. Go in pride. We'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.